Hello everyone, I'm Chloe Johnson and welcome to this Fresh Business Thinking COVID-19 webinar series supported by BT Skills for Tomorrow. BT Skills for Tomorrow aims to empower businesses and their employees with the digital skills to help grow their business. The Skills for Tomorrow website includes free learning content that small businesses and their employees can access at any time on topics such as connecting with customers on a mobile, making sure your customers can find you online and much more. To find out more, click on the link in the comments. Coronavirus is continuing to be a challenge for small businesses and entrepreneurs across the UK. The outbreak leaves an overwhelming uncertainty into the future for business owners. But this is a time when, as a business community, we need to come together and support one another. And we're lucky enough to work with organisations and individuals who are passionate about supporting entrepreneurs during this difficult time. One of those is our speaker today, Karen Green, a business mentor, speaker, and author of the best-selling book, Recipe for Success, The Ingredients of a Profitable Food Business. Karen has a wealth of commercial experience, having worked as a buyer for UK grocery retailers and commercial director for various food manufacturing businesses, from turkeys to sushi. She now works with F&B brands, enabling them to deliver profitable sales and growth through better understanding of the customer journey, whether this is a direct consumer or B2B. Today, Karen will outline key steps for how to prepare to negotiate your next deal and develop the skills so you can get more effective with your results. Karen will be talking for 40 minutes and then we'll have some time for a Q&A. If you do have any questions for Karen, leave them in the Q&A function on your screen and we'll do our best to get to them later on in the session. That's all from me for now, and I'll pass over to you, Karen.
Hi, thank you, Chloe. That's fantastic. This is the first time I've done a Zoom call with so many people, so I'm going to try and answer questions if they come up, but Chloe's also going to field them, and maybe if there's some common themes, pull them together at the end. So first of all, I'm going to share my screen with you, and I might have to on front screen. There we go, and then we will get started. So yes, welcome. My name is Karen Green. I think Chloe's pretty much explained, but I thought it would be useful to give you a little bit of a background about what I have done so far in my life. I started working in retail at, well, probably the age of 5 actually, but actually getting paid for it at the age of 14 in a store called Camp Oxham, which is the photo on the left. I then went and worked for Tesco's as a graduate trainee and did some buying, and then as a Boots buyer, and also doing quite a lot of different commercial roles, culminating at the end of that career with Boots, which was 14 years actually as a national account manager selling toiletries. I then left Boots because I was so keen to work in the food industry, because it's a real area of my love, and so worked for a number of different businesses. Some of those are on the screen. As Chloe said, from turkeys with Bernard Matthews and Ichiban, we were supplying own label sushi to Tesco's and Boots, which kind of brought me a little bit full circle, to be honest. For the last, gosh, it's 3.5 years now, I've been running my own business, Food Mentor, and been working with a variety of different companies, mostly food, 1 or 2 not food, but my expertise and passion is for food. Ranging from, on their Cream and Country, which is ice cream, I acted as their MD for 8 months. Daloon, did some work with them, helping sort out a bit of a muddle with Tesco. Ditto with G's, did some consultancy work, and then working with some smaller businesses. So Fit Bakes, this year we got a listing into Sainsbury's and the Co-op, helped mentor her, which was actually through Virgin Startup. So I am a Virgin Startup mentor, and I do deliver some courses for them on food as well. We've got another one coming up in September, actually, not plugging other courses, but hopefully we'll be able to do that face to face. And also mentioned the book, and I judge quite a few of the food awards, which is entirely self-indulgent because you get to eat food all day, which is just great. So that's me. What I thought would be interesting today is to talk about negotiation, and because it's such a broad topic, I've kind of split it into 2 areas. So I'm going to give you some ideas and some thoughts about what you need to do to prepare. I know that not everyone on here is necessarily selling food or drink, so I've tried to think through some other areas of negotiation that we can think about. We are all negotiating at the moment. So whether you are selling a product or a service, you're going to be negotiating with your customers, thinking through how to come up with deals. You might be wanting to negotiate with banks, because I know a lot of us are looking at getting loans. I guess a lot of people are through the mortgage holiday negotiations now, but there is quite a lot going on trying to talk to banks and get money from them. So I'll think about that as we go through. Suppliers, I've got a lot of clients, sadly, who've got suppliers who can't afford to pay. So I've been coaching them on how to negotiate and think through what approaches could you take, how could you come out of it in a positive way. And employees as well. If any of you guys have got a number of employees, again, you may well have gone through the furlough process, but there may well be more work that you need to do. So negotiation is such a broad topic, but I kind of went onto Google and sort of to get a definition, and it came up with a discussion aimed at reaching an agreement, which I thought was an incredibly simplistic but quite useful definition. Yeah, I found this picture of different offerings, and I thought it was quite funny, so that's why that's there. Okay, so let's start with the first area. One of my sales directors, quite early on, I obviously had failed to prepare for a particular meeting, used this expression, by failing to prepare you are preparing to fail. And I didn't actually realise it was Benjamin Franklin. I actually thought it was maybe his personal learning. But I think the key in negotiation is preparation. Having said that, and we are going to now go through 6 ways to prepare, you can over prepare. And I think it's really important for me to talk about this at the beginning, because I have examples. I did it quite early on at Boots, prepared a negotiation with a new supplier. They came in, they were selling Hallib Orange, actually, which I think is still around. And I was ready for that negotiation, and they completely blew me away with something completely different. And because I was so into all my preparation, I wasn't ready to negotiate as best I could. So we need to prepare, and what I teach clients, and at the end I'll tell you I'm going to do a masterclass on Friday, is how to build a negotiation toolkit. So you've always got things in your back pocket to negotiate and to enable you to deal with the things that you're not expecting. They're not all bad, actually. Sometimes people will come up with something that you're really not expecting. You go, oh gosh, that's nice. And yeah, you need to try and anticipate those. So 6 things to prepare. First of all, what's the objective of your negotiation? This might be to go in and sell something to somebody. You might be selling a service, you might be a consultant, you might be selling a product. And this particular negotiation might be that kind of micro about that specific situation. But I think what you also have to think about is your longer term strategy. This is a particular issue, I think, with suppliers at the moment. So if you're negotiating with suppliers, or if you're offering a service like myself, and you've got a client and you really want to work with them, but you actually really want to get a decent fee, a fair fee, sometimes it feels uncomfortable and quite difficult, because you don't want to, grind someone into the ground like maybe Tesco's might do to produce a supplier. But you want to have a good outcome. And when I did training on negotiation, certainly at Boots, there was a lot of discussion around win-win. Sometimes I think these days it doesn't feel like win-win, but at the end of the day, what you want to come out with is something that you're both happy with, and that is going to enable you to have a long-term relationship, because in most cases, these are not one-offs. Possibly with a bank, actually, it might be a bit more one-off. So the next thing you need to do generally is do your numbers. As I said, I work a lot with food businesses, so we look very carefully at the numbers, and what's the cost of actually supplying a product, what's the distribution, what's the marketing, what's the future investment, what's your likely sales. if you were going after a bank loan, it would be, what's your cash flow? How can you present your business in the right way? How can you demonstrate you can pay that loan back? What do you think they're going to be looking for? In terms of numbers on something like that, you might also want to go and have a look at what somebody else is offering, so that when you go into a discussion and say the bank came back with we want to give you a loan and it'll be 15%, if you've done your numbers and you've done your homework, you might be able to say, well, actually, I know that there are other alternatives, and be able to present them. Okay, so numbers, very important. And then something which is always a challenge, I think, when you go into a negotiation, especially maybe at the moment when people are feeling a little bit vulnerable, is what is your source of power? And there's a lot of theories around sources of power, and it depends on how much you want something, how strong your opposition is. So, for example, if you are a very small supplier and you're supplying Tesco, you would assume that Tesco has the power. But if you take the example of when I was at Ichiban, they were 90% of our turnover was Tesco. So you would assume they had ultimate power. But actually, in reality, there was no one else who could supply the sushi that we could supply, because there just wasn't a big enough supplier of sushi. So actually, although you think that one company is the minnow and one company is the big one, it wasn't necessarily the case. So what I did was work a lot with the team at Ichiban when I first got there, to think about, well, how can we use that in a constructive way, obviously, because the worst case scenario, of course, is they go, well, we'll get someone to build a factory, which I have seen happen. So whatever you do with your negotiation, you need to sit down and think, what is your source of power? So that might be in relation to who you're talking to. So you might have something that's amazing, and I'm sure that you've looked at USP in a lot of detail over the years. What have you got that's a unique selling proposition they can't get anywhere else? With a bank, probably your greatest source of power is the fact that you can go to another bank, but you might be a much better, stronger candidate for a loan than maybe your competitors, because you've got a better cash flow, better understanding of business. With a supplier who doesn't want to pay or is going to go bust, that's more difficult, because actually they might have the power of not paying. So again, you have to think about how can you encourage them to pay, maybe by doing a deal for the future, better terms, etc., etc. So source of power is something I think you need to be very creative with, but you really need to think about it before you go into the meeting. But you also, if we move on to the next point, think about what don't you know. If you go back to the example of the vitamins, where I didn't know that these guys were going to bring other stuff in, I think it's really useful to think about what are the types of questions that the person you're negotiating with is going to ask. Think about what are the answers. What's the most awkward question that someone could come up with? Even role play with someone who doesn't know what you're doing. So, someone who's not in your business, someone who's not in your arena, get them to role play with you and ask you questions about your business. And they will probably ask you very innocent questions, but actually they might be the questions that you suddenly go, oh gosh, I don't know the answer to that, and it will get you prepared. So that's part of preparation, but also part of that questioning needs to be thinking, what questions do I need to ask this person? So if you're negotiating with a bank, what do you need to know? What's the repayment terms? What's the rate of interest is obviously going to be a key one. How long can you spread it over? What support can you get from the government? Do you have to have a guarantee? I don't know, lots of different things. Obviously, always go to their websites first, because you want to be clued up. But if there's questions you don't know the answers to, because sometimes you can come very unstuck. I did recently by not asking the right questions about distribution with a retailer, and we got ourselves into a bit of a muddle because it turned out to be a lot more expensive. and we'd already agreed a cost price. But anyway, so even when you've been studying negotiation for 20 years, you still can fall off your perch, as it were. So be prepared from the what don't you know, but also be prepared to ask questions. It's not a weakness, it's actually a strength, and it can really help to get people to engage and negotiate. So that's your preparation. Who is on your team? Now, you might have a big team of people, which is fantastic, or you might just have you. But when you go into a negotiation, I think you have to think about the process of that negotiation and think about who's going to do what. So this is a very, very strange picture, but I quite liked it because you've got somebody who is listening, and there's a great book called Don't Split the Difference by Chris Voss. I really recommend it. It's a great read. He's an ex-FBI negotiator, and it's just a great book to read, but he does go into a lot of detail about how to negotiate. And one of the things he says is that they will always have a listening person along the side the key negotiator. Because when you're negotiating, when you're presenting, you tend to be focused on the presentation, focused on the negotiation, and not necessarily listening to the other person. So if you can take someone along with you who can be your listener, and if you're doing a negotiation on the phone, which I actually don't recommend at all, but might not be so easy with somebody like a bank, for example, you need somebody who can be listening. You need to be watching. So is there somebody who can actually be watching what's going on? You need a timekeeper. If you're going to do a meeting and somebody says I've only got an hour, you need to only do an hour, because again, that can be interesting. I've been in meetings where buyers have walked out, actually, which was a bit rude, but and then decide if it's just you, that's fine, but then you have to make sure that you're conscious that you are keeping the time, you are making notes. I think that's really critical in any negotiation as well, because as we'll go on to talk about in the second section, negotiations can take months, years. I mean, goodness knows, let's hope applying for a loan isn't going to take years, but certainly there's a company called Aqua Carpatica I did some work with, who create water, Romanian water. It took them 3 years to get Tesco's agreement. So you think how long that negotiation was going to last. It's a long time. But think about how you could bring in somebody else, whether it's a co-founder, whether it's a marketeer. It might be someone like myself. I go to a lot of client meetings to help them negotiate and support, because it's just giving you that additional support. Doing a negotiation on your own is difficult, but you do need to agree roles beforehand, and also so you don't end up contradicting yourself, which I have done in the past. Okay, so know your enemy. Obviously, you're not necessarily having to look at your the opponent as the enemy, but I think it is key to know who you're negotiating with. So I teach quite a lot about selling and negotiating, and I always get people to look at who they're going to meet on LinkedIn or Facebook, or get as big a profile as possible. There's a great system called Crystal Knows, which you can install on your Chrome desktop, and it will look at the LinkedIn profile and profile a client or someone you want to negotiate with. And I met somebody last week off of a webinar. She came on a discovery call, we had a chat, and I was telling her about the reasons why she didn't like selling, and she was so impressed. She was like, gosh, that's really, really great. And she signed up. And I showed her and I explained what I'd done, and it was all around Crystal Knows, which was really helpful. But what Crystal Knows will also enable you to do is to, and this is obviously if it's a one-to-one discussion, Crystal Knows will actually give you suggestions for how you tailor your negotiation, you tailor your presentation. So I'm just having a look. There's a lot of flashing going on in the chat, but I don't think I can see it. So what's the app? Crystal Knows. It's Crystal knows, as in knows.com. It's fantastic, and I think you get 10 goes for free, so don't waste them all by first of all doing yourself, which is inevitable, then your partner, then your friends. It is really good. So yes, so Crystal Knows helps you profile who you're going to see. If you're going to sell to a company, we all have different approaches and personalities, and we don't even have the time to get into it. But for example, I'm very direct. I'm a red. I'm a director personality. I want you to get straight to the point. So the negotiation for me would be very succinct. Whereas someone who's more of a blue personality is going to want lots of data, lots of numbers, lots of detail. And it's really useful if you've got an understanding of that personality if you're doing a one-to-one negotiation. So anyway, more of that on the, as I said, I am going to do a masterclass on Friday. So if you want to sign up for that, we're going to do that in a bit more detail. Obviously, so that's the person. Then we've got obviously the company. So what do they need? What are they interested in? What have they got at the moment? What are they likely to say to you, ask you? What's their objections? You know, even if we're talking, say, about a bank, for example, how are they going to look at your business? So gather as much information as possible, get experience. Again, I'm going to go back to LinkedIn. I should get commission for promoting LinkedIn, but you know, even if if you ask around your friends or go on to one of the many groups that are available. I'm sure GBAA has got a Facebook group, and just ask people, you know, I'm going to negotiate with Santander. Has anyone had any experience of this? And it's just so useful to get all that feedback just to put into this chunk. Okay, that's going to be an interesting question. Bernard, I'm going to come back to that question at the end. That's an interesting one. Okay, so those are the 6 things that I think you should pull together, and I tend to summarize them all into what I call the negotiation one-pager. So basically this is a summary of what we've already done. So things like setting the scene, what's the meeting purpose, what's our objectives, what do we think their objectives are, where's the conflict going to come from, why are we great, so you know, what makes us great, what makes our company great, and then what makes us great in this specific meeting, because also negotiation isn't just a one-off, it can be several meetings, and you might be negotiating several parts of the deal. So for example, you might be in a competitive situation with maybe 5 people pitching for the work, and then you're down to the last person, and then you've got to do a deal. So your objectives and your negotiation one-pager will differ on both of those different occasions. Fill in the roles and responsibilities, who's going to do what. As I say, if it's just you, you're going to be a bit ambidextrous, but that's fine, so long as you're at least aware of it. And then, as I say, do some idea generation. What might they ask you? What might they say? What's going to be your responses? And then there's a whole piece around control, which we don't have time to talk about today. But again, over the years, I've seen a lot of different buyer tactics, like they'll make you stand up, they'll give you only 5 minutes, they want to do it in the foyer because they haven't got a meeting room, all sorts of different tactics and games to play. I talk about some of those in my little book that I've got, which I'll introduce you to at the end, which might be quite interesting to go into in a bit more detail. So second part, and I've kind of called this 10 ways to turn no into yes, and I've got a little checklist with these as a handout. But the first thing to do is to make sure you're actually talking to the right person, and this can go each way. So I've actually done negotiations with a product developer, so they're not a buyer, they've got no jurisdiction on range, they've got no jurisdiction on buying, but actually there was such a strong solution provider. We provided the solution. They then went and talked to the other people. However, they didn't have the ultimate decision making. So sometimes you'll get someone who will say no because either they're not a decision maker, and they don't want to admit that to you, or there'll be other people who will need to be involved. And it's a really difficult one to deal with, because you don't want to say, are you senior enough to make a decision, because that's really it's not helpful. But you can ask questions around it. I spent a lot of time recently for a client, wasted a lot of time actually talking to Santander, pulling together, because I work with her on a commercial basis, pulling together a lot of information about cash flow and forecasting and what we think new customers are going to be like. And we got all the way down, and I've probably been doing this for a week, and he turned around and he went, I only do factoring, so I need I'm not the right person to talk to. You need to talk to someone about loans. And it just annoyed me, because I'd done all that time and I thought I'd done some great work, and of course it was a waste of time because he wasn't the right person. So sometimes someone will say no, because you've not got the right person. So it's hard to establish, but think through who your stakeholders are going to be. The next one is tailoring your proposal. Now, sometimes this might not be important. So, for example, well, actually it probably is. Even if you're dealing with suppliers who can't pay, you may well have more than one supplier, and I think you might have to think about different approaches. So I've got clients at the moment, and I'm tailoring what I'm doing with them in terms of, some have said they can't pay, some have said, can we pay differently, some have dropped off, put it on hold. So there is a need to tailor what you want to achieve, which is ultimately good relationships, to make sure that you're getting the best out of each negotiation. And obviously, if you're selling a product and a service, you probably will have a sales presentation, and it's and it's something I feel so strongly about, that every presentation you do needs to be tailored, because every person, human being you present to, is going to have a different personality, so you need to tailor it to that. As I say, 2 slides for me, 30 slides for someone else, and also make sure that you're tailoring it for their particular corporation as well, because believe me, I have done it. I have sat in presentations where we've presented the same thing to Tesco's and Sainsbury's, and we've left the Sainsbury's logo on. It's a beginner's mistake, but I tell you what, it happens, especially if you're very, very busy. So tailor. The third thing is rapport. This is, again, it's a massive topic, but you need to establish rapport from the beginning. People buy from people, there's no doubt about it, and that can range from the type of clothes you wear going into the meeting, to profiling the person and knowing they're particularly interested in a football team or what have you. So you are actually having a relationship with that person. And certainly over the years, you'll find certainly retailers move people around quite frequently, because that breaks relationships, which is much better for negotiation power. But also, if you're not dealing with these big scary people, but you're actually dealing with somebody you want to sell maybe a service to, you need to build that long-term rapport, because a no today might lead to a yes tomorrow. There's some woo-woo quote about, a no is the first step on a journey to yes, which I find a little bit nauseating, but the principle is actually there in a lot of cases. So what else can you do? I think as part of your preparation and a part of your thought process about your source of power is being aware there is always a plan B. And even if you're on your knees and this is the only bank that is going to lend you the money, you could always go bankrupt. And I know that sounds horrible. I've been through a bankruptcy, and that was a plan B, unfortunately, in one case back in the recession of 2009. I've bounced back, but that was my plan B. It doesn't make it any less stressful, but it can help, because when you're negotiating, and I've seen it happen to myself, which is why it's really good to have two people in the room, you can get very emotional. You can get, especially if it's your business and, you know, there's potential that it might go bust or you might lose a massive account. Keeping relaxed enables you to do all the things that I've talked about already, about getting the rapport, listening properly, reading the signs so that you can negotiate in a better way. It's not easy, and sometimes you just need to walk away from the meeting and come back again so you can actually breathe. I think that's really key. I've mentioned this already. We've talked about do your preparation, know what questions to ask, but you have got to listen to the answers, and buyers will give you clues as to what they're looking for. Banks will give you clues. Banks are a little bit more black and white. Suppliers, if you ask the right questions, if they're struggling to pay you, are going to give you the right answers. They're going to tell you that, you know, they're short, mostly in cases at the moment, short of cash. But if you can ask the right questions, listen to the answers, you can actually start to find the solutions. And that's a lot of what we need to do in negotiation, is find solutions to people's objections. Which leads me on to the next one. If you can tell somebody is not overly keen on it, the art is to find areas of agreement. So if you're negotiating something that's quite large and they're just like, no, I'm not sure I really want to work with you, you can break it down into chunks, and start with finding areas of agreement. So if you can say, well, we agree that the market is in growth, we agree you need a widget, what are your issues with my widget, for example? That, so you've given them the mindset, and this is also sort of the mind psychology. They're starting to, oh yeah, actually, yeah, no, they do know their stuff, you know, but a bit of concern about the fact that, and that will enable you to sort of lead on to number 7, really, which is addressing issues in chunks. So instead of getting a flat, whoa, no, you can go, okay, let's break it down. So you're not sure about the widget. What is it about it? Is it the, you know, we'll do food because it's the area I know best. Is it the range? Is it the marketing? Is it the investment? Is it the price? Is it, and you can start to break down somebody's objections. You might not get there in the first go, because what you might then need to do is go away and not rush and say, okay, I'm now going to go away and think about it, or look at how you could take cost out, or look at how you could improve your cash flow if you're trying to talk to the bank. There is always time. I'm trying to think. Obviously, if you've got somebody who's wants to bring in the administrators, time is more limited than average, but there is usually time. And I think one of the biggest killers of successful negotiation is rushing. And unfortunately, buyers do use a lot of tactics, and one of those is deadlines. So, you know, talked about deadlines at the beginning, but if you're up against somebody who's saying, if we don't list it by Friday, you know, so for example, I'm working with Ocado at the moment, and they're like, well, we've got M&S coming in September, so if we don't get it in shortly, so we need to have a deal now. And you're kind of like, oh gosh, right, okay. And that puts pressure on, and you make bad decisions. So breathe, don't rush, don't get stressed. And I'll cover that again at the end. Actually, I've got a slide on what I do anyway, my approaches. Oops, sorry, missed one. So I talked about buyers using deadlines, but what about you using deadlines? if you think about the double glazing salesman or woman who probably you don't see that often anymore, their whole objective is to get you to sign on the night, because they know, and I don't know what the statistics are, but something like 60-70% of us, if we don't sign on the night, are probably never going to sign. So if you can set deadlines of your own, and this might work maybe if you're trying to get a supplier to pay you and you say, look, I really need this money by Friday, what can you do to get it in by Friday, can we give you a deal? That sometimes pushes people over the edge to say yes and positive. So it's worth thinking. And then sometimes you just get a no, and sometimes you don't get a deal. And you know, I make a lot of proposals to clients, and sometimes they go forward, sometimes they don't. The key thing is to ask, why didn't you proceed? What else can we do? If it's a flat no right now, I mean, I've just tried to do a negotiation with a client with Ocado. They've actually come back now and said no. So my next question, I've got 2 questions for them, is we've got some alternative things to offer. So we're going to say, look, I know it doesn't work in this section, but have you thought about how it might apply in this? And then to say, okay, we know that in September you've got all this M&S stuff coming in, when will you review the range? So find out when you can go back. And then what I do for that is to build an ongoing relationship. So you keep talking to them, sharing useful advice, sharing knowledge. So you're building that relationship. I mean, you're all going to be pretty experienced in business, so you'll know that you've got to touch somebody 5, 6, 10 times before they'll do a deal. So you just keep touching, writing, emailing, sharing stuff to give them the opportunity, because the time just might not be right. And that's the point. It does take time. And I think, yes, I mean, I gave you the example of Aqua Carpatica. It took them 3 years to get a listing into Tesco's, but it has been very productive. For me, I think my longest client, I met them 2.5 years before they signed to do some work with me. Some takes time. Obviously, if you need a loan right now, waiting 3 years for the bank to get around to it is not particularly helpful. And then just finally, what I mentioned was, what's your success ritual? So any of you who've studied neural linguistic programming might have learned about how to generate anchors, which is basically how to create that positive state of mind. So for example, be well rested. So if you're going in for a real serious negotiation with a potential customer who's 90% of your business, as we were at Ichiban, I can pretty much guarantee you I didn't sleep well the night before that negotiation. But be as well rested as you can. Sleep is the most fantastic way for enabling your brain to work. Music is very emotive, as we all know. If you're listening to a piece of music, it could make you happy, can make you sad. It is old-fashioned, but actually, if you have a success piece of music, you need to be using that before that meeting, whether you're going in the car. Obviously nobody's going anywhere at the moment, but just before you do the meeting, let's get that music out. Dress for success. Even if you are doing an online meeting or you're on the phone, wear the clothes that you feel the best in. Make sure that you look the part. If you wear makeup, then put makeup on. Have a piece of jewelry, have a pair of shoes, lucky socks. Even footballers, they all have lucky socks. It's the whole point about building a success routine ritual, so that you've done all the preparation, you know your numbers, you know all the facts, but you also are giving yourself the best chance to be the best you and the best negotiator and the best team. And then, I eat the right power foods. I can't work if I'm hungry. So, I won't do a negotiation or a difficult phone call unless I've eaten something first. That's just me. I eat a lot. Barocca, again, I'm not I'm not a salesperson, I don't get commission on Barocca, but I actually quite like Barocca. I find it quite uplifting, and the B vitamins gives you energy and helps your brain to go. So my last recommendation is build a success ritual over time, so that you go into that meeting as buoyed up and bouncy as that dog is in my photo. So that's a kind of whistle stop 40 minutes on negotiation. As I say, I do have a book which is on Amazon, it's only 30 pages. It's a shortish book, but it does go into it in more detail. On Friday, I'm doing a course, a masterclass on negotiation. So we're going to go into some of these things in more detail and follow this up and think about basically building that toolkit, so that you can always have your toolkit, and there'll be some downloadable templates as well. So how to do the numbers, how to set some zones of potential agreement, and all sorts of different things like that. What to do if you've got difficult buyers. It will depend. I'm going to have a look at who, at the moment, most of the people I've got will be selling something, a product or a service, so we'll probably focus on that. What to say to get the best deal, and thinking about futures and relationships. So that's on Friday. I think Chloe is going to put the link in the chat, so if you want to sign up. Okay, so I have some questions. Chloe, do you have questions as well? No, I can't hear Chloe.
I've got the same questions.
Okay, so I'm going to do the Q&A to start with. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's great.
Cool. Okay, so Bernard's asked me, you mentioned about clients walking out in meetings in the midst of a discussion. I've had such an experience and want to know how you deal with the aftermath. Prevention is better than cure, of course. I think what you have to do is follow it up pretty quickly, preferably with a phone call, to say, you know, can you let me know what the issues are? If you know what the issues were, try and address them. But if somebody's walked out, then you don't actually know what the problem is. So you're going to have to talk to them. And I would, if it's more than one person in the meeting, I would pick the person you think you'd probably get on best with as well. Because if there's somebody in that team that's confrontational, I wouldn't necessarily go after them. But I would certainly leave a period of time to let everybody breathe, and then go back and say what's happened, what's the issues, and again go back to the question answering. Abigail's asking, how can you get past that gatekeeper to get to the right person you need to negotiate with? It's a whole nother course. It is a challenge, but sometimes you just have to persevere. I've been negotiating with a major retailer at the moment, and I don't actually think the person that I'm negotiating with is in charge, because she keeps going back to her boss. But it's quite difficult for me to get past her. So all I'm doing is, I think I've copied her boss in once, but it's a very dangerous game to play. I don't like doing it that way. So I think you can ask questions around the subject. So I think I do address this in the book, actually. Try and find out who is the gatekeeper, who else is involved. Tell me a bit more about your structure, your business, your decision-making process, but put it in a very soft way, so it doesn't look like you're saying, look, you're not the one I want to talk to. Stuart has asked me, I was furiously writing down notes and missed writing down the title to number 7. Number 7 was break down the key issues into chunks that can be addressed more easily. So what I was saying was, first of all, establish areas of agreement, then take the bit that they're objecting to and see if you can break it down again into bits. Janet's asking, would you say sending your buyer gifts is over the top, or is it okay to do so? You're welcome, Stuart. It is unethical in the retail world. So, and probably in most worlds now. I mean, I work with several government organisations, and Virgin and Enterprise Nation, and we have to sign something to say we wouldn't accept gifts because it's so on the verge of bribery. If it's an example of your product, yeah, why not? I don't know. I mean, I would definitely send products, but or you could send them in a nice box. But I think gifts nowadays, no, it's just not. For me, I don't think it works. But I'd be interested actually if anybody else has a view on that, or would offer gifts, because I think that's quite interesting. I'm now going to try and find the chat, which I can't find. Come on, I stopped sharing. Right, now I can have a look at the chat. Chloe, have I got other things?
Yes, there's a question that's coming through the chat from Martin. Who was your toughest negotiation with in the business world?
Tesco. Without a doubt, Tesco. Yeah, we had a situation where we had to put a price increase through, and they used every trick in the book, from because we were supplying own label, they wanted to do open book costing, so we had to show them all our costs, to arguing about that, to doing this, to doing that, to giving them 6 years inflation and figures on cost of salmon. It was the most complex negotiation I've ever done, and I got within a cat's whisker. And he did what I call the Columbo moment, and I'm sure none of you are old enough to remember what Columbo does, but he'll ask all these questions, and right at the end you think he's leaving, and he comes back and goes, just one thing. And they did that, and they completely unraveled the whole deal. We did get inflation through, but it didn't last for very long either. It was very, very tough. And they also use a lot of tactics as well, in terms of, it's an hour's meeting and we're finishing in an hour or half an hour, or they'll do it in the foyer, or I think retailers are particularly good at that. So that's probably my worst one. So I probably shouldn't say Tesco. A retailer. Other retailers are available and just as difficult. What else have we got? Gifts. Feedback about gifts.
A question has come in from Valerie. On the subject of gift, any recommendations on how to get your foot through the door for a first meeting? Would you consider a giveaway item to work?
The way I work is I use LinkedIn quite a lot for business, to start to build that relationship. So actually just starting to I was going to give you an example, actually. Forgive me, it's drinks, but it's a company called Drop Bear Beer. They're a client of mine. They're lovely, young low alcohol beer company, and they wanted to target the retailers. So what they did was they started writing pieces on LinkedIn, and they did one about how low alcohol beers grow the overall craft beers grow the overall category, and they tagged a lot of the buyers, and the Sainsbury's buyer got in touch and set up a meeting, and so that was really interesting to see how she'd used LinkedIn. So I think a gift itself, I have to be honest, I'm thinking when I was at Itchabans, and I think it was a design agency or a marketing agency sent me a bag of Maltesers. I like Maltesers. I don't know whether they knew that, or that was just their lucky break. But yeah, that worked. So I think that something trivial, something fun, is okay. So I suppose when you hear the word gift, you go, "Oh, I'm not sure about that." But something that's really quite creative, that makes you think. And that's the reason actually I wrote my first book. When I started out as food mentor, I wanted to be able to share something that established my credibility. So that's not a gift. If I send you my book, you're just going to see, oh, look, she does know a lot about her subject. So something like that, which is probably the same as you're gifting knowledge rather than gifting a thing, which might be a bit more ethical, unethical even. What else have we got, Chloe? Sorry, there are some others coming.
So we've got one from Jack. We have a client we work with on one property and they are very happy with our services. They have another site we would like to work on and the contractor there is providing a terrible service. How do we highlight this without looking jealous?
It is a challenge. It really is a challenge. I think you have to, I'm just trying to think on property. I think you just have to give the feedback. I mean, to start with, how do you know that they are providing a terrible service? So that would be where I would start. So can you show that there are bad reviews from somebody? Can you show they're not doing it right? I mean, I've been watching a hotel being built behind my apartment and it looks extremely dangerous what they're doing. So can you raise it in a way that doesn't look like you're whistleblowing or you're being difficult, but actually do it in a positive way? So you can say, look, I've got this, we've got this great service, we're doing really, really well. We would love to take on another project. And maybe sort of think about, well, is there a deal to be done there? So could you give them a better price? Could you give them a better, show them how they could have a better service? I don't, it's not about jealousy. I think it's just bad practice just to slag somebody else off. And I never do it. Even if I don't particularly like someone else who does what I do, I will never slag them off. I will actually say, this is what I do, these are my strengths, this is what we're doing, look at the great work we're doing. We think we could do a great job with you, and it would make it a lot easier if we did them both together, because that would make us more efficient and we could maybe cut out some cost, rather than going, they're doing a terrible service. That's how I would approach it.
Fantastic. Karen, thank you for your time for joining us on the webinar. I've included Karen's LinkedIn in the comments, so if you do have any questions that pop up after the webinar, then you can ask them through here. I'm sure our audience will agree that was a great session for all those entrepreneurs out there. If there is anything you'd like to catch up on from today's session, then we'll be sending out a replay of the webinar coming shortly. Our next webinar in the Business COVID-19 series takes place on Thursday, the 30th of April, and we'll be joined by founders of Spectrum Collections, Hannah and Sophie Pycroft, as they discuss gaining digital momentum and getting to know your audience during this crisis. If you haven't already, you can register for this webinar at freshbusinessthinking.haysummit.com, or you can click the link in the comments. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you again, Karen.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.